Okay, sorry, I was making sure everybody was getting into their name tag there. Okay, so just getting started here. Jared, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide there, please. So let's just start with what is the entrepreneurial mindset. Let's start by saying that it's problem-oriented. What I mean by that is it really drives, the problem is what drives the learning activities in the mind of the entrepreneur. So the mindset is really kind of a set of skills that empower someone to recognize those opportunities. And in that process, the mindset relies on the individual learning from setbacks and identifying ways to solve those problems as new issues present themselves. And then Jared, looks like you already moved on to the next slide. That's fine. So we know that the problem inevitably presents itself along the way. So the mindset is to go back kind of to what we were talking about to the previous weeks and talk about pivoting. We have to be fluid in our learning process and make sure that we make changes when it's necessary. So it isn't something that necessarily has a start and a finish date, but rather something that the individual uses through their life so they can apply these skills, not just in the short term, but also to use these experiential learning opportunities in their future careers. So like when I can, I try to relate this back, all the material back to my personal life. So when I was 25, I started my own business in real estate, and I like to think back to my mindset and realize that, you know, I didn't really have as much information as I do today, but I picked up little things along the way from my successes and my mistakes that I encountered, and they'll help me, you know, in the future as I grow in my career. So I'll hand off the next slide so we can talk about a little bit how the mindset is different.
Thank you. All right, so thank you, Brian, again. So I'll be talking about why is this mindset so different. So the reason why it's got to be so different is because entrepreneurs must be they must be creative. They must be able to communicate with their team. They need to definitely have a high motivation to succeed. They need to be open-minded to risks, of course. And entrepreneurs embrace risks and have a different way of thinking and managing from a traditional manager point of view. And the mindset consists of a set of beliefs and thoughts to drive behavior and the ability to adapt to change in the future. And Jared, you go ahead and switch to the next slide. Thank you. So of course, there's three different types of mindsets of entrepreneurs. So there's the right direction mindset, which means that the decision must be made in a timely manner to avoid any time constraints. There's the go for no mindset, which incorporates focusing on a no response. And we always utilize this mindset in my field when we're recruiting. And so if you can embrace a no, a yes is always going to come. The I was wrong mindset means that the entrepreneur is willing to admit when they were wrong, to learn and adapt. And the ways to overcome these mindsets are to write down what you want. Don't stress over the process, be clear, be passionate, and be so passionate about your mindset and your goals that you get emotional about it. So they always take life into their own hands.
Yeah, that's really good. And I wanted to add a little bit to it about, you know how Dr. Meeks, you were saying that last week, like life just kicked a bunch of people in the teeth, but because they were entrepreneurs and they were in this entrepreneur class and learning this entrepreneur mindset, that yeah, they just got the work done. They kept going, and that's what I really like about the entrepreneurial mindset. That it is, yeah, it makes you tough, and you push through adversity to get it done.
All right, so I had this set of slides talking about the business model. You know, basically it's your description of how your business is going to run. It's going to help validate your go-to-market strategy, and it's essentially your plan for making a profit. What it's going to identify, you know, the products or services and business plans to sell, your target market, anticipated expenses, little things like that. It's going to help you attract investments, recruit talent, and motivate your staff. And a little snapshot of the business model, there's kind of 6 components you want to focus on before you then go on to scaling your business. So solution value proposition, pricing strategies, of course, your customer relationships, channels for how you're going to reach said customers, key activities, and key resources. So on the next slide, I included a bunch of different examples on different business models. So you have your subscription-based model, which basically the customer is going to pay a recurring price at regular intervals for access to a product. I thought about magazines and of course Netflix. I read that they have 73.94 million subscribers. So obviously something is working over at Netflix. Affiliate, different type of business model where you basically sign up with the company or network to sell their product and service. Then you get paid every time someone buys something. So I thought about, Instagram influencers. I'm an affiliate for the CBD oil Nuvita, where basically I have a little coupon code. Anytime anybody uses it, I get a kickback from that, which is really nice. There's the retailer profit. They basically work by selling products and services directly to buyers at a markup. So, your Target, maybe other department stores, clothing stores. Leasing, I thought about, vehicles. You can lease your vehicle, then it ends up, you can either choose to pay it off at the end or give it back. Memberships, I thought about gyms really, and I think membership's pretty similar to the subscription-based model, to be honest. I read that the membership plan can kind of be the ideal for a business owner to have customers regularly paying you on a consistent and recurring basis. And then of course, good old multi-level marketing, strategy that some businesses use to encourage their existing distributors to recruit new distributors. And then it kind of, arguably a pyramid scheme, but, depends on who you ask and how you look at it. I also included just a little bit about if you're going to go to the next slide, the business model canvas, just because this completely blew my mind and how genius I thought it was, how it gives you really a good snapshot of what your business model looks like. If I'm going to go to the next one, I actually found Facebook's business model canvas, which I thought was really interesting. So the key partners, basically, how do you get, keep, and sell your customers, their value proposition over there in the middle, what value do you deliver to the customer? So they look that connection with friends, their reach, their personalized and social experiences. So I thought it's kind of interesting to include that in there as an example of what an actual business model canvas looks like for a business that we've all, kind of heard about.
It's really interesting. I also found it's really interesting that I was just talking to my fiance about this. Sorry for the beeping, it's a drawer. We were talking about how many subscriptions, everything has become subscriptions. And so it's so easy to get lost in, not knowing how many things you're paying for per month. And so they actually made an app that you can track all of those subscriptions and everything, and it'll track it for you. But yeah, it's just crazy how much it's changed. So yeah, if you want to go to the next one, Jared, I'm covering the business model, business plan. So there's quite a few differences between the business model and business plan, but I think the best way to look at it is to be able to incorporate the two together. So with a business plan, I'm sure, as us being entrepreneurs and having business plans, it's super, once you have an idea and you're running it by someone, they're usually like, well, did you make a business plan or did you make some sort of thing? And you're like, oh yeah, I guess I'll write something up. So the business plan is typically that long document that just gets eventually thrown into your desk somewhere and not taken out. It's kind of that startup plan. It's presenting the company's strategies and expected financial performances. But a business model is used more often now because it's actually more of an incremental growth rather than just focusing on, the end goal. It's more about the how do we get there. So you can go to the next slide then. So here are just some more differences and similarities between the two, but honestly, that's the main part of it. It pushes the company to solve out factors. As your marketing theory, it's concerned with more short business success to get to that end goal rather than just that long one-page document. So they talk about that business cycle, which I put the little model in there. We talk about hypothesizing and going through all of the experimental processes. So it's more of a cycle that keeps going around and around so that you meet those goals throughout. And that's kind of the main reason why it's more successful than doing a business plan. But it's super important that you have that implementation, which is why I added that to the business plan. Being able to implement those practices into your business plan can still make your business plan successful, and it's still good to do. But it's also good to incorporate that business model as well. I'm gonna hand it over to you, Sarah.
So thank you, Corianne. Yeah, so in order to also make your business successful, you need to be able to have a successful elevator pitch in order to establish value for your company, in order to explain what you do. So the concept of an elevator pitch, excuse me, is a short, pervasive, if I can speak English today, it's a persuasive speech that you're trying to spark interest into yourself and others in a short amount of time. So the key things that you definitely need to remember about an elevator pitch is that you need to have confidence, you need to make it intriguing, you need to make it persuasive, and it also has to be short. So I'll go ahead and talk about the 6 concepts of an elevator pitch. So there's the Pixar pitch, there's the subject line pitch, there's the rhyme, there's questions, Twitter, one word. And so I'll talk a little bit about subject line and rhyme. Whenever it comes to the subject line elevator pitch, this is something that I utilize in work. And whenever it comes to that, whenever I'm drafting up emails, you always have to be able to make sure that you're establishing credibility with your company and also getting the message across in a short amount of time. Whenever it comes to the rhyme elevator pitch, my company, of course, if nobody's heard it yet, I'm not even going to talk about the company, but it's with a great insurance rate online. Go to the general and save some time. And that's always something that it's short, it's sweet, it establishes, what we're trying to do here. And it's always going to stick in someone's head, just as such as J.G. Wentworth. I'm sure you've all seen the commercials as well. Those always stick in my head, or even Allstate's hands, are you in good hands? So it's always those rhymes that get the message across, but still establish that credibility, and they're going to stay in that person's mind for a long time. And then, of course, there's the one word elevator pitch, which whenever you think of the word search, you may think of Google. So now this next slide, whenever it comes to how to draft your elevator pitch, you want to be able to communicate your company's value proposition. You want to be able to identify what you do. You have to explain your goal, and you need to put it all together. But of course, you definitely need to practice. In order to be able to have that confidence, you need to be able to just practice in your room, and it needs to be at least 20 to 30 seconds. And so whenever you actually present your company's elevator pitch, you need to be able to start them off with a question. And then you need to be able to empathize with that person. You need to be able to not only add value to the company, but you also need to be able to control the situation at all costs. So if you think that there's something going on with that person, per se, the conversation's not going as how you anticipated, you need to be able to learn how to control that. And of course, you need to be able to, like I said, have confidence. And this is where practice and knowledge is going to come in. And that's very important. And I'll go ahead and hand it off. Oh, never mind. This is still me. My bad. I'm sorry, guys. So whenever it comes to the examples of a successful elevator pitch, Airbnb was a good one that I knew about. Whenever it comes to them, they were able to present their idea with a great pitch. They just focused on the value, simple solutions. And now, of course, they have a $74 billion market cap. So you need to be able to establish your first impression. And like I said, practice, practice, practice. So now I'll pass it off. I apologize, guys.
That's really good. And I apologize for my voice, Dr. Meeks. Yeah, I just wanted to describe some key elements and give some advice on that as well. Like you were saying, Sarah, the rhyming pitch is amazing. And Dan Pink said, pitches that rhyme are quite sublime. There's just something about it. And there's something about it, it makes it sticky. It sticks with you, like you're saying, go to the general and save some time, or exactly what it was. But actually in our brain, the Lafayette College did some research and actually enhances the processing. It really even makes it more truthful and believable. They had a double-blind test going on with one group with the same proverb that did not rhyme, but then they reworded it to where it did rhyme. And the people with rhyming, they believed it more, they thought it was true, and it really stuck with them. So a rhyming pitch is a great element. And you really want to tug on heartstrings, put the emotion into it, put the, but be genuine with it. Because I don't know if you guys have seen the Shark Tank, and when they're losing, they're about to tank it. They're about to lose, and their pitch is going poorly, and then they thought, oh well, this is what's going on in my life, and this is they're trying to pull on the heartstrings that way to save the pitch. That's not what I'm talking about. You need to be genuine. It needs to be about who you are and a part of your story and a part of the reason that that you exist and you're pitching this. The next portion, I really wanted to give advice and what I found the most effective across the board, really, is this message map. It's so simple and it is so effective. Honestly, you can hone it down to just 15 seconds with the headline and the 3 subpoints. So you want a Twitter headline, and Twitter, it limits you to 140 characters. So it's got to be hard hitting, it's got to be punchy, and it's gotta really stick. But then underneath that, you have 3 subpoints, at the maximum 4 subpoints, but 3 subpoints that back that up. And then that will just take 15 seconds. But if you have a longer time in the elevator or wherever you are, and the person is more interested in your idea, you can then take examples underneath your subpoints and really bring it to life and really back up what you've been saying. But super helpful in really any situation in life, because we are storytellers. Like humans, they love stories. We connect to those, and this is a very good way to set that up. So if anyone else has any comments on that, we can just go ahead and go on to the next person.
Yeah, Jared, I think the psychological component of what you were talking about is really interesting, just because just kind of tying it back to human emotion and how much that plays a role in all of this. So thanks for sharing that. But yeah, go on to the next slide there, please. And chapter 6 was full of information. We kind of already touched on the business model and how the value proposition are early steps in the process. So I won't dig too much into that, but building off some of the information that Allie presented earlier, one of the areas discussed in detail in this chapter was the snapshot, which essentially is their adaptation, the author's adaptation of a trimmed down version of the business model canvas. So the idea here was just to make things simpler, to trim the fat, to focus on the entrepreneur as opposed to maybe a business like Facebook that Allie talked about earlier. At this point, we should be pretty familiar with the slimmed down version because we're pretty familiar with the BMC, which is what she already talked about. So Jared, you can go on to the next slide there. Chapter 6 talks about several tools that can be used and applied in different areas within the snapshot when delivering a value proposition. So the PSM is essentially just a gauge of equilibrium. It just it helps you to estimate how supply meets demand and how that will dictate the optimal introduction price of your product or service. The consumption chain tool is really just a set of questions. They kind of address those 5 areas identified at the top of the slide there, where it says customer awareness, customer evaluation, all those areas basically are outlined with these questions, and it kind of helps you to touch on each one of those areas. And then finally, that customer influence pyramid kind of touches a little bit more on how you identify your partners. So at the bottom of the pyramid, you have more control because it's closest to the company. And in the mix, you'll have different partners, kind of like what Corianne talked about earlier with influencers. But at the top of the pyramid, closest to the customer, you have very little control. But those are that's how the pyramid works. But using these tools and nailing the snapshot is really what will bring you ready to go to market. So I agree with the author here, because if you have any major weak spots in the snapshot, it will decrease efficiency, waste time, many of the things we've already been talking about, and that time could be better spent elsewhere in your startup. And then finally, this last slide right here is just talking a little bit about cost structure and pointing out that entrepreneurs should defer fixed costs and work towards variable costs. That way you have better resource management. So I'm not going to go too deep into that, but we'll go ahead and hand off here to the next slide.
All right, so I tackled chapter 7 of the Innovators Method, all about mastering the pivot. Your pivots are going to accommodate your missed guesses. You're going to have your new knowledge, unexpected changes in the market, poor planning decisions. So basically, pivot logic is you're operating in extreme uncertainty. You've probably made some assumptions and guesses that are probably built on other assumptions and guesses. And at the end of the day, they could all be wrong. So we pivot. Keep some of what you have, change course, and then, there's kind of 3 different types of pivots. Either you're solving a new problem, you're solving the same problem with a new solution, or you're improving your business model. Can you go to the next slide for me? So basically, we don't want to overuse pivots, but what I thought was interesting is they don't have to be made sequentially or all in a row. You want to stop when you have what's called pivot takeoff. So what pivot takeoff is a dramatic increase in your customer interest. Like at that point at pivot takeoff, we know we found a problem that's worth solving, and the solution is actually solving a problem. And what I read in the literature is that this typically occurs during the 3rd and 7th pivot. So it just goes to show you pivots are not just like a one-time thing. They can occur up to 7 times. When it comes to pivot testing, there's 3 different models that we want to use. Our abductive is like an intuitive guess, like, kind of what your gut tells you. Your inductive is going to be a qualitative theory development. So we're going to go from specific, branching out into general. Your deductive is going to be your quantitative theory testing. We're now going to go from general down to specific. We definitely want to set time-bound deadlines for pivots to keep us all kind of going in the right direction. At the end of the day, pivot means that we learn. It's a good thing. I certainly agree with the author because, we're not always going to get it right the first time, even the 2nd, the 3rd, or the 4th time. And pivots give us that ability to make changes and kind of course correct along the way as we gather more knowledge and more learning.
Cool. Yeah, and then so once you have your hypotheses and you turn them into facts, that's when you can begin to start scaling. And you want to make sure that when you get to that point, well, the ultimate goal is to be able to scale at the end of everything. So, planning ahead to make sure that this is something that you can scale is also super important. But the logic of scaling is to reach a broader marketplace and find really that money-making spot. It incorporates a lot of traditional management skills towards the end of the block. And it also uses the V2 MOMs tool, which I'll describe in a second here. But if you stay on that for a second there, Jared, this model, which was used by Professor Meeks in our video, I thought it was a super easy and simple way to kind of see the process of scaling. And I would compare it to like a slow roast coffee because you don't want to go too fast. A lot of entrepreneurs know how to get everything started up, but can't in the end do the traditional management that it takes it towards the end of everything. And then it works the other way too. A lot of traditional management doesn't incorporate that entrepreneurial startup aspects as well. So it's really important that they're slowly, gradually going through the process and finding that chasm. That is the hardest part. So where it's between the early adopters and the early majority, that's actually where it's the most challenging transition. So it's super important to get through that. And you can go to the next slide too. And timing is super important in all of that. So venture scaling requires market scaling. So going from that minimum viable product to the whole product at the end of it. Process scaling is going from the discovery to actually executing that product. And team scaling is making sure that you're hiring the right people for the right skills. And so that's, again, where that process is, making sure that you're hiring the right people, because not all the people that are our early adopters are going to be able to accomplish all of that traditional management that it takes to scale. So that is an important thing. And then V2MOM. So those are the 5 parts that give us a detailed map of where we're going and understanding how to get there. Usually it lasts for about 12 months, and then you can repeat and make sure you're reassessing as you go through. So that includes our vision. What do we want to achieve? our values and what's important to us as a company. The methods is how are we going to get there? And then obstacles is what's preventing you from being successful in the end, where we are messing up, where we can keep going forward and what's working for us. And then measures is how do you know you have it? How do we know that that is going to be what works? I'm gonna hand it over to you, Ali, again.
Yeah, and the last part that we kind of worked on together, why is this different from what Eric Rice meant by pivot or persevere and grow? So back to last week, just what Eric said about pivoting or persevering and growing. Pivot is a course correct to test fundamental hypotheses regarding product strategies or engines of growth. I found the two to be quite similar. I mean, last week we talked about the engines of growth and now we're talking about scaling, but to me, they're pretty synonymous with each other. I don't know what you thought, Corianne, but I mean, to me, there were similar concepts, both meaning, the pivoting was kind of the same, and then scaling and growing, we had engines of growth versus now scaling like we just talked about, but to me, they're pretty similar.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like that you put that the pivot is not giving up. And I think that applies to this as well. As you're scaling, as you're meeting these different marks, just because you're changing different ways of doing it doesn't mean that you're not making progress. So
yeah, that's what we had for this week.
Anything to add, anybody? All right, well, good job. I'll go ahead and stop recording here.